Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I know that Dr. Lewis was concerned about being the last speaker before lunch. So you can imagine how I feel being the first speaker after lunch, but we will proceed. So I am going to be looking at the National Risk Assessment, the approach that was taken to undertaking that National Risk Assessment, and some of the lessons learned. And then I'm going to hand over to Astrid, and Astrid is going to take it from the FID's perspective. So, the purpose of the National Risk Assessment. Why undertake a National Risk Assessment? Of course, it is to assist in identifying and understanding the ML and TF risks that are here in Jamaica. And the National Risk Assessment, when completed, the report was published in August of 2021, and it covered the period 2016 to 2019. It also helps to facilitate the targeting of resources because, of course, you want to focus your resources on the high-risk areas. And most importantly, this is not a one-off exercise. National Risk Assessment is something that is ongoing, and in order to keep that process alive, it is a way of maintaining a sustainable and ongoing program that is designed to strengthen Jamaica's AML-CFT framework. So how did we approach this? Because this is a mammoth exercise. Of course, tone from the top. We needed a high-level support, which we got in the form of the Minister of Finance and the Public Service, who is actually the ultimate sponsor of Jamaica's AML-CFT efforts. The project was coordinated and led by the Deputy Governor at the Bank of Jamaica, who's also the Deputy Supervisor of Banks. There was a dedicated project team that was created within that office and also involved of course, collaboration from and bringing in, as Dr. Lewis would have mentioned, someone from the private sector as well. And it was really a joint effort, a really collaborative effort to get this done. So what about the process? We use the World Bank's tool, and it's very, very, very intricate. There are a lot of variables. Within each variable, there are several criteria, and it's very data-driven. So in all, we looked at over 370 variables. It was not an easy task. And so we've been talking about collaboration all day, and the National Risk Assessment is really a very good example of that collaboration. We would not have gotten it done without the help of all the agencies and all the departments and all the competent authorities. So this just gives you an idea of all of the agencies that were involved in the process. There was also a writing team and an editorial team, and of course there was help from other stakeholders that came in at the time that they were needed. So, looking at the approach, we had no choice. This had to be dealt with in a project-like manner, right? So those of you who are familiar with the Scrum process, where every single day you meet and you have touch points with where you are, what's happening, what needs to get done. So we had our working groups that were established, and these are working groups from all of the agencies coming together and looking at all of the data, doing the research, doing surveys, conducting interviews. We had to develop a database to track all of the information that we were collecting, because it makes no sense having all of this information and then when you need to refer to it, when you're doing the analyses, you can't find it. So we did that. We did all of the analyses in groups, and we made sure to keep meeting to agree on the assessments. So this is just the data gathering, the analysis of that data, documenting everything that you've done, having those working group discussions so that you can get consensus. Then, once all of that is done, we then had to do all of the data entry into the World Bank tool. Once that was done, we did the draft report. Then we had stakeholder consultations, and this is very important because this gives you an opportunity to reach out to the different sectors to get their point of view, to see if there's anything that needs to be taken into consideration. Is there something that we missed? Is there something that perhaps is being done that because of the data that was requested, this is something that may be a little bit outside of the norm, but it's still relevant. So these stakeholder consultations were very important. And of course then, the issuance of the final report once all of that was taken into consideration. So, what are some of the lessons? The biggest lesson coming out of this is the data collection. That was the most difficult, painful, tedious part of this exercise. And that is because, as I think it was mentioned earlier, I think Selvin, you mentioned it, every single agency, every single institution, right, collects statistics in a different manner, counts in a different way, right, saves their information in a different format. So can you imagine having to sort, sift, go through, pick sense from nonsense going through that data, right? So what that means is we spent from September of 2018 all the way until July of 2021 collecting data. Now remember what was said earlier, right? The National Risk Assessment looked at the period 2016 to 2019. We were collecting data in 2018 all the way to 2021. See the time gap, see the amount of data, see what's going on. So all of this is a challenge. So moving on a little bit more and looking at some of the other lessons learned, it was really absolutely critical that we approached it as a project and had project management employed. Then, of course, there is the need to make sure that the whole process is sufficiently resourced. This is not an exercise for off the side of your desk. This is a full-time, all-day process. So you also have to look at assembling the working groups, and those working groups need to include persons from all of the relevant agencies. And this is critical because what happens is you start to get a broader understanding of risk across the country, because each sector gets an opportunity to see and discuss the risks in other sectors. Competent authorities get a chance to understand what other competent authorities are facing. So all of that leads to the buy-in. It's very important that we get buy-in from all of the stakeholders, everybody. And you have to keep everybody engaged so that it doesn't start a lag. It keeps the momentum going. And of course, with all of this, we saw that there is a greater need, and this is something that has been raised this morning through this conference, the need for greater collaboration and for these cases to be referred. Right? And remember, we all know it in our jobs when we are told if it doesn't get measured, it doesn't get done. Same thing applies. So, what are some of the next steps? So, recommendations under the mandate of the NAMLAC, there has got to be a national mechanism that remains in place. It's put in place, it stays in place to make sure that there can be that efficient collection and analysis of the data. And that means everything about data management has to be taken into consideration. So the data collected cannot be in an ad hoc fashion. So you can't have 6 boxes of all different types of paper sitting in the corner of the room, some on somebody's personal computer, on their desktop, not on a shared drive, right? Not on a network. That won't work. So I think I've said a mouthful. So now I will hand over to Astrid, who will take you through the FID's perspective.